Today's session is entitled Multilingual Thinking and Learning in Multicultural Classrooms. This is part of an approach that I've developed throughout my career as a teacher and head teacher, and which has now become a very big part of the whole approach and philosophy of education that's now known as the joy of not knowing, or the JONK approach. The whole approach started when I was a teacher in Bristol, and it started off as a thinking skills approach to the curriculum, to education, and to the day, which led to the publication of Start Thinking, which is a collection of is a book with a collection of open-ended thinking skill starters that meet and greet the children every morning in the classroom from early years to year 6, and that launched the day with a very, very exciting theme of open-ended self-esteem, challenge, thinking, creative thinking, all sorts of things. They're really, really wonderful day to launch the day and to create such a lovely, warm atmosphere in the classroom where every child feels success even before the formal learning has started. And that gradual thinking skills approach to the curriculum and to the day developed throughout my years as a primary teacher, and most recently as a primary head teacher, and it's now encompassed within the whole philosophy of education and approach to school leadership, which has become known as the joy of not knowing, or the JONK approach. And you will be delighted to know that today's session is chapter 11 of the Joy of Not Knowing book, which is published by Routledge. So today's session represents the final step, the putting together of the whole approach into practice within multicultural classrooms that greet the children and enable them to work and to think and to learn multilingually and multiculturally. Before we go into the main detail of the strategies that enable that approach to happen, I just wanted to give you a very quick flavor of why the phraseology of the joy of not knowing, how that came about, and why it's so relevant and so valuable and so useful for the children to be introduced to. The concept is very simple. It starts with discussing with the children that whenever we're learning, we start here, and then there are two options. If we know the answer, we're allowed to jump across the pit. If we don't know the answer to what we're trying to do, to the problem we're trying to solve, to the questions that we've been asked, then it's great because we can go into the pit and work out. This is where we work out the answer, find solutions, and then eventually when we've come to a good position in what we're trying to learn, we climb out of the pit and end up in that same position. Now, the very key question that's very transformational with when this is presented to the children, and you can see how here the children are actually sat around the pit and actually living it in practice, is this. If you say to the children, those children who, when I asked the question, knew the answer and felt really happy and jumped across the pit and were really happy and knew the answer, did they learn anything new? And when the children start to think about that question and start to realize that no, in fact, they jumped across, when they jumped across the pit, they knew the answer, so they didn't learn anything new because they already knew it. So they start to realize that the only way to learn something new is to not know it first, which is why it's called the joy of not knowing, and to go through this process of going into the pit and coming out of the pit again, having done the learning. So that's the realization that in order to learn something new, we have to not know it first, is incredibly fundamental to introduce children to, for them to then realize that not knowing, finding things difficult, to being uncertain, is not a position of deficit, but it's a position where we are all at, and by definition it's the beginning of all new learning. So it's an exciting place to be, rather than somewhere where a place where we feel worried or anxious because we don't know. So that's the kind of basis of the approach. But around that, around the creating that into a whole school philosophy is the fact that it's built on a foundation of values. So in order for children to be able to feel emotionally well when they're here, when they are in the pit, when they are in a position of knowing, when they are finding things out, when they are learning, in order for them to feel emotionally well in there and supported, a values-based approach to the whole way of being and living together in the classroom, in the school, is set up. And as you can see here is a values-led culture for learning that sets the system up within a community of inquiry in the classroom. So by establishing a values-led approach, the classroom becomes a community of inquiry where every child feels able to contribute, feels safe to contribute, feels safe to take risks, thrives on challenge, all those sorts of things. And that's created by developing in the classroom a set of values, having a really clear vision, introducing the children to children's rights, and discussing the responsibilities that come along, having rights, responsibilities that enable those rights to then come to the fore and to actually happen. And a set of lifelong learning dispositions. So the JONK approach very much teaches the children how to develop those dispositions that make them successful as lifelong learners. And then there's a big focus on global sustainability and community links, so that the learning and everything, the teaching and the living together is always in perspective of everything else that's happening in the wider world. But very specifically, what this session is about is one aspect of the approach, which is the importance that the approach gives to celebrating the whole child. And by that, what I mean is that it's really exciting in the classroom to embrace, to celebrate, and to welcome the richness with which every child enters the classroom every day. And I mean the multicultural richness, the multilingual richness, the experiences that child brings their whole lives. If that is embraced in a very explicit way in the classroom, then the whole day becomes incredibly exciting. And what happens is that not only that the child who's been embraced feels really good in terms of self-esteem and confidence and enthusiasm, all sorts of things, but it's been shown that with a multilingual approach to learning, all children, regardless of whether they're monolingual, bilingual or multilingual, benefit, because in the sharing and in discussions of enabling this multilingual approach, everyone benefits in that culture. So it's a very exciting culture to establish with the children, and to discuss with them, and to be very open and explicit with them that everything that they bring with them, the whole multicultural and multilingual richness that they have, will be embraced and can be incorporated into the daily teaching and learning routine of the classroom. Now, how is that done? In order to do that as part of the daily routine of the classroom, I've defined 3 different strategies. strategies 1, 2, and 3 enable the multilingual approach and multicultural classroom to be really, really part of the everyday routine. Now, the session, the theme 1 of the multilingual learning approach focuses on encouraging, allowing, enabling the children to use one language first and then use a separate language to achieve the same end product. So it's using language separately. So they complete a task in one language and then they complete a task in another language. So that's one way of using, and I'll show you examples of all these in a second in the next few slides. And then themes 2 and 3, or strategies 2 and 3 with this approach are ways of enabling, encouraging the children to use all the language that they have inside them, but in combination, and that's really, really exciting. So in 2, they're using it in a very structured way, so they're combining the use of all their language in a structured way, and whereas in 3, they're using all the wealth of language in an unstructured way, just freely as they feel is best for them when they are accessing their learning. So let's now look at specific examples for each one of these 3 themes. So if we go back to theme 1, remember theme 1 was using language, more than one language, but using them separately, using them uniquely to do first in one language and then in accessing a task in another language. There are 2 examples which I want to share with you in terms of how this can become a real part of school life, of the life of the classroom. For example, if you look at this one, these poems here. Now these emerged from when I was the head teacher of Hertford Infants and Nursery School in Brighton. The children in reception wrote a book of poetry called Once Upon a Slime, and to celebrate, which was published, to celebrate the publication of the book, I wrote a poem. I wanted to contribute a poem as well as the kind of preface for the book. Being the head teacher, so I set about writing my poem. Because I'm Argentinian, my first language is Spanish. How I feel, how I think most, and how I feel most deeply, and how I can express my sentiments more naturally is in Spanish. So what I did is I first of all wrote the poem in Spanish, and then I wrote it in English, so it can be accessed by the community who speak the language of instruction. But you know, it's fantastic, because if imagine on a daily basis, if the children set about the learning objective or having a go at the works at the learning of that day, imagine if they were given the freedom to first of all engage with that learning in their language of presence, in the language in which they can be, you know, really, really engaged in it, enthusiastic about it, thinking deeply. It opens, and then they can do it in the language of instruction. So it's a really magical way of enabling the children to feel that they can engage with the learning in the way that's deep, that it means that they are engaging with it in the deepest emotional sense to begin with, to do all their thinking. And then this is a really lovely idea as well in terms of creating that culture in schools. This again is in Hertford Infants and Nursery School. What we did is we created what's called a Thinking in Playgrounds blackboard, where an open-ended challenge would be placed on the blackboard every morning. And as you can see there, the families and the children with chalk out there every morning before school starts would have a go at learning together, thinking together, and contributing to the challenge on the blackboard. But that is a wonderful opportunity to develop a multicultural approach. Many times the challenge in there was, you know, sharing your favorite recipe, messages in your language, World Languages Day. It can, you know, families were able to express themselves in their own language as well as in the language of instruction of the school at all times, and it meant that they felt very, very welcomed into the school community, being part of the school community, and that their language, their cultural heritage, their multilingual phrases, knowledge, words, and multicultural aspects of their family could be embraced and celebrated at school. So if we move on to the second way of using a multilingual approach in a multicultural classroom, remember the second theme, the second approach is enabling children to use more than one language in a structured way. So for example, if you're doing, again, this is another example of a thinking skills challenge. If you're doing a thinking skills challenge, so for example, you're thinking of doing an A to Z of animals, where you have to think of an animal that starts with every letter of the alphabet, then it's really exciting to be using more than one language to try and solve that problem. But in a structured way. So you can say to the children, the first A has to be in the first letter has to be in one language, the second letter in another language, the third letter in another language, and so on. So if they're asked to alternate their contribution, the language that they use to contribute to each of the phrases, then it's fantastic. So in this case, it's Spanish, English, Spanish, English. There's alternating, but using all the language that a child has to solve one particular problem. Really, really exciting. If you think about that in the classroom, you can be applied to in so many ways. This is another really lovely example in which that can be done. This is a mind map of a child has done a mind map of themselves. So they've got themselves in the middle, and then they've got branches talking about their families, their friends, their hobbies, school, and so on. Again, this can be turned very, very effectively into a multilingual, multicultural approach and theme and enrichment of the child's engagement with the task, because you can say to them, okay, the branches to do with your family and your background can be in one language. The branches that are to do with school and your friends and so on can be in another language, or whatever you mean. So you're structuring each branch, giving the child the opportunity to contribute to complete the mind map, the same task, but using more than one language in a structured way. So that's really exciting. And even more exciting, I think, is the ability to create and to have that ethos and culture in the classroom where a child feels completely free and at ease to use all the language that they have at any time to create their work, to do their thinking, and even to present their learning to yourselves. So, for example, I'll give you two examples here of this one. In this one, this is one of my favorite math challenges to give children. What you have to do in this math challenge is that you have to describe the number by using words or letters, but you're only allowed to use the number of letters that correspond to that number to describe that number. So, for example, A means 1 and uses one letter to describe the number 1. So that's great. Bi means 2 and it uses 2 letters to describe the number 2. So that's brilliant. And similarly, tri, it means 3, uses 3 letters. 4 fantastic. It means four, uses four letters. And then look what this child has done here. Completely openly, they have a knowledge of Spanish. So they use the word cinco, which means five in Spanish, and uses five letters. So that's brilliant. Then they reverted back to English, 1-6, brilliant, means 1-6 and uses six letters. And then reverted back to Spanish, 1-7, that means 1-7. So, you know, it just shows you how using all the language that child has enabled them to really enjoy accessing that very exciting challenge. And then this is really interesting because this is a way of also encouraging the multicultural richness that a child has, and not necessarily, in this case, it doesn't even necessarily mean that the child or the family were born or come from another country. This is a family that lived for 2 years in Peru, and when this task was set, which is the task was to design a menu that could be used in a restaurant based on healthy eating. So as when we're doing healthy eating, healthy lifestyles in science, their task was to design a menu based on healthy living and healthy eating that we then use throughout the topic in various ways. But what this child has done is created, used her experience of living in Peru to create a menu, El Café de Florencia, so termed in title in Spanish, and then has used a completely bilingual approach to explain what the nature of Peruvian food and the ethos of her restaurant, and then has used again a bilingual approach that she chose to use completely freely to describe the dishes within her menu. So this shows you how wonderful it is to be able to just have none of these were instructed. It was just the ethos and culture of the classroom just enable this to be done like this naturally. I just also want to show you how amazing it can be when this is when this approach is also shared across different cultures, and how different children in different cultures then interpret the same principles. So one of the main concepts and main strategies that the JONK approach is based on is enabling the children at the beginning of the year to create their own models of learning. So this is where they describe how they function as learners, and they describe their model of learning, their way of learning using a model, which is really, really fascinating. So in this instance, for example, this is a child in year 1 who was really, really fascinated by dinosaurs, and has interpreted the bit that we started with in the session, saying that before he learns is in prehistoric time. Then he goes through and does his learning, and then when he finishes his learning and comes out of the pit, he's in human time. So he used his passion, the things that he was passionate about, to create his own personal model of learning, and that's how he views learning. And it's just wonderful if every child does that. But then look at this, when the same concept was introduced to children in Madrid, then their multicultural interpretation, it was even more fascinating. Again, a year 1 child interpreted the whole concept in a way that has never been interpreted in with all the children in England that I've come across this approach. This child in Spain has got has renamed the concept of the JONK approach, el hoyo de la felicidad, the pit of happiness. And you can see what he's drawn himself here with a friend inside the pit saying, no lo sé, I don't know, and really, really smiling. So you can see how this embracing this multicultural approach and multilingual approach is enabling children to interpret things in their own way, using everything that they carry with them, lingually and culturally. And I just wanted to finish off the session by mentioning that I've just recorded a webinar for the Chartered College of Teaching on multicultural thinking and learning in multilingual thinking and learning in multicultural classrooms. And I have also written a paper for the new education exchange section of the Chartered College of Teaching, which is a fantastic resource for teachers all over the world to come together and share ideas and resources. So those two other sources are available for further reference, as is of course the Start Thinking books with lots of challenges like we saw in this presentation. This is the Australian version, and chapter 11 of the Joy of Not Knowing book. I really, really hope you enjoy the session. I really hope that it's given you lots of food for thought, and that you can see how this approach can be embraced within your own context, within your own establishments, to enrich what you, or to build on and enrich what you already provide. And these are all my contact details. I'll be delighted to hear from yourselves and carry on the discussion. I wish you all the very best.